On December 7, 2011, the Office of the Auditor General of British Columbia released a report entitled Effectiveness of BC Community Corrections. To read the full report and other supplementary documents, please visit our website at www.bcauditor.com. The following presentation provides an overview of the report. The Auditor General, John Doyle, is the independent auditor of the Legislative Assembly of British Columbia. Mr. Doyle reports to the Legislative Assembly, not to the government of the day. The Office of the Auditor General conducts both financial audits and performance, or value for money audits. The Community Corrections and Corporate Programs Division of the Ministry of Public Safety and Solicitor General is responsible for supervising all adult offenders on a court order. The division's purpose is to contribute to safer communities by assessing and managing the risks and needs of adult offenders. This is achieved, in part, through its goal of reducing rates of reoffending by offenders under its supervision. The division services 428 communities across the province, employs 670 staff, 450 of which are probation officers, and has an annual budget of about $47 million. The division supervises roughly 24,000 offenders. This represents close to 90% of the correctional population in BC. The other 10% are supervised in jails. The job of supervising offenders, especially with the goal of changing their behavior, is a complex responsibility. To achieve its goal of reducing reoffending, the division has implemented a case management model based on good practice in the field. This model involves a risk needs assessment, case planning and implementation, and case review. Successfully supervising offenders so that they do not reoffend has many benefits. It can result in reduced threat to public safety, fewer economic and social costs, and increased social productivity if offenders become contributing members of society. Community supervision is also a less costly alternative to jail. Supervising an offender in the community costs $7 a day, compared with supervising an offender in jail at a cost of $194 a day. The purpose of our audit was to determine whether the Community Corrections and Corporate Programs Division is achieving its goal of reducing rates of reoffending for offenders serving community sentences, and to identify specific areas that may be impacting the division's effectiveness. To determine this, we examined whether the division is reducing rates of reoffending for community corrections, monitoring, evaluating, and continuously improving its activities to ensure they are effective in reducing rates of reoffending, managing its human resources effectively to ensure the program's success and sustainability, implementing the case management model effectively. We were unable to conclude whether the division has achieved its goal of reducing rates of reoffending due to the dynamic nature of the measure and the limited trend data available. We will explain this further with the next slide. Although we could not conclude, we did identify areas that may be negatively impacting the division's effectiveness. These areas include the division's performance monitoring and evaluation framework, its capacity assessment approach, the quality of offender supervision, and the division's case management model. We could not conclude whether the division has achieved its goal to reduce rates of reoffending. The rate of reoffending is a dynamic measure. Data becomes available only once an offender who has committed a crime is sentenced. 22% of active cases in the criminal court system take between 1 and 2 years to process. Some take even longer. Because sentencing can take considerable time, the rate does not reflect a final number until the majority of court cases have concluded. In addition, while the rates are accurate as of the day they are viewed, we needed a longer trend to be able to conclude on whether the goal of reducing rates of reoffending has been met or not. Regardless, the Division does not see the overall rate of reoffending as a key performance measure, because the rate is influenced by a number of factors outside of its control. These factors include sentencing, other programs and services, and the mindsets of the offenders themselves. While the Division is not solely accountable for rates of reoffending, they influence it through their case management model. More importantly, it is the Division's goal to reduce reoffending. Therefore, it is our view that they should be monitoring and using this information. Regarding monitoring and evaluation, the Division does not fully understand the impact it has on rates of reoffending. The Division offers a wide range of programs and services to help offenders change, but only evaluates some of these programs and services for their impact on reoffending. More specifically, while the Division evaluates its core programs and pilot partnership projects, which are joint initiatives with other ministries, the Division does not evaluate its $5.3 million worth of contracts to determine if they are effective. Contracts include such services as counseling, Aboriginal justice services, and multicultural programming. Programs offered in the community that offenders may attend are also not evaluated, because the Division does not feel it is their responsibility to evaluate services that are led by other agencies or ministries. Given that the Division is referring offenders to these programs, they should, at the very least, gain assurance that these programs are having the intended effect. The overall impact is that the Division does not have a complete picture of its effectiveness. In 2011, the Division drafted a request for additional resources, stating it is under-resourced and that this is having a direct impact on its effectiveness. We therefore expected to find the Division had made a comprehensive assessment of resource capacity, including the impact that current resource levels are having on program effectiveness and long-term sustainability. We found that the assessment is based primarily on a high-level comparison of caseloads across the country. This does not account for provincial variations in offender supervision, nor does it account for workload factors. As a result, the work that the Division has done to date to analyze its resourcing needs is insufficient to evaluate the significance of this risk and to address the long-term implications that a lack of staffing may have on the sustainability and effectiveness of its work. Furthermore, the provincial comparison of average caseloads is too general to be the primary basis for analyzing resource capacity. Current and projected caseload increases necessitate a comprehensive assessment of any gaps between capacity and caseload, both currently and in the future. Quality supervision is enhanced through a number of practices, including training and quality assurance. With respect to training, the Division's policy only requires training for probation officers supervising sex offenders and domestic violence offenders. However, the Division has established expectations that probation officers complete training in most other aspects of offender supervision prior to working with offenders. As shown on page 21 of the report in Exhibit 5, probation officers do not always complete the required and expected training. For instance, the average completion rate for probation officers supervising sex offenders was only 20%. For those supervising domestic violence offenders, the average completion rate was 42%. This creates a risk to public safety and jeopardizes the effectiveness of rehabilitation efforts. Staff morale and stress levels may also be impacted if probation officers are put in a position where they do not possess sufficient skills and support. With respect to quality assurance, the Division implemented a quality assurance model in 2008. Among other things, the model assesses probation officers' compliance with case management policies. Local managers are expected to review 4 case files per year per probation officer. We found that, on average, only 2 reviews are completed each year, and follow-up occurs on only 25% of files that identified a need for improvement. Our audit also identified deficiencies with the system that may skew the reliability of the results being reported to management. This limits the division's ability to work with staff who may need assistance or additional training to ensure that standards are met. The division has implemented a case management model that reflects good practice in the field of community corrections. It is applied to all sentenced offenders to reduce their risk to reoffend. When a sentenced offender begins their community supervision, they are assessed to determine their risk to reoffend as well as the needs that are contributing to their reoffending. Determining the offender's risks and needs is the first step in BC's case management model and informs every subsequent aspect of the model. Our audit showed that, for the majority of offenders, probation officers correctly identified each offender's overall risks and needs. Once an offender has been assessed, a case plan is created to identify how their risks and needs will be addressed. Policy requires that every need have a corresponding intervention and that offenders receive a certain number of interventions to address their risk level. Our audit of case plans showed that just over half of offenders' plans contained interventions to address their needs and risks. We also found that only 35% of the assigned interventions in our sample were ever completed. While an offender's willingness to participate in interventions can preclude completion, our audit found that the majority of incomplete interventions was the result of probation officers' actions. Our audit of case plans suggests that offenders are not being provided with the programs and services needed to reduce their risk to reoffend. Regarding documentation, the case management model used in BC relies heavily on the individual discretion and professional judgment of probation officers. Therefore, thorough documentation is paramount to successfully managing offenders, an area in which we found notable gaps during our audit. For example, 90% of the files we sampled did not contain a rationale for why breaches were or were not reported or enforced. The recommendations in the report are designed to mitigate the key risks that were identified. The recommendations are also designed to help the division gain additional information and insights so that it can know whether it has achieved its intended outcomes, as well as what may need to change in order for those outcomes to be achieved. We will follow up on the status of the implementation of these recommendations in our April 2013 follow-up report. We will issue a management letter to the Ministry on the more detailed findings of our audit, and will also follow up on the status of these recommendations through our April 2013 follow-up report. For more information on these recommendations and our findings, please read the full report. Effectiveness of BC Community Corrections is available online at www.bcauditor.com. That concludes our summary of this report. To read this report and our other publications, or for more information about our office, please visit our website at www.bcauditor.com. The Auditor General encourages your feedback on this report as well as your suggestions for further audits. We look forward to hearing from you.